1. Gone in Seconds Room 57 welcomes you. Some crimes send chills down your spine not because of blood or brutality, but because of how quietly they happen. Jaycee Dugard was one of those cases. She vanished at just 11 years old. No calls for help, no solid witnesses, and the most horrifying part, Jaycee wasn't hidden in some distant mountain bunker. She was kept right in the middle of a quiet California suburban prison for 18 years in someone's backyard. Morning like any other June 11, 1991. Jaycee woke up early, like usual. She slipped on a pink sweatshirt, tied her blonde hair neatly, shouldered her backpack, and started her short walk to the school bus stop just 300 meters from her front door. Her mom was making breakfast in the kitchen. Her stepdad stood at the door, watching her head down the hill. Jaycee had no idea that her entire life would be torn away in just a few minutes. A gray, beat-up car slowly rolled up. Inside was Philip Garrido, a convicted rapist recently released from prison alongside his wife Nancy. They had spent hours driving through towns, hunting for a girl. The car stopped. Philip stepped out, pulled out a taser, and shot Jaycee. Without hesitation, she collapsed. Nancy opened the back door and pulled Jaycee inside. The car sped off. 10 seconds. That's all it took. The panic that came to Lada Jaycee's stepfather saw everything, but from too far away. He grabbed his bicycle and tried to chase the car, but it was hopeless. By the time police arrived, the vehicle had vanished. A massive search effort followed. Helicopters, search dogs, volunteer teams all combed the forest around South Lake Tahoe, but there was nothing. No blood, no shoe, no trace, no surveillance footage either. This was 1991. Jaycee had disappeared, as if she had never existed. Her mother, Terry, was devastated. She printed flyers, pleaded with reporters, followed up on every false lead. But time passed. The media moved on, and the world quietly forgot Jaycee Dugard, except she hadn't gone far. She was just under 300 kilometers away, a backyard prison. Hidden in plain sight, Philip Garrido brought Jaycee back to his house in Antioch, California, a calm suburban neighborhood. Behind his house was a bizarre patchwork of fences, tarps, and overgrown weeds. This is where he built her prison, hidden from the street, invisible to anyone who didn't look closely. Jaycee was locked inside a makeshift shed. No windows, no escape. Garrido forbade her from using her real name. He gave her a new one, Alyssa. He lied, telling her mother had abandoned her. There was no phone, no books, no mirrors, just an old TV, Garrido's disturbing voice, and Nancy's quiet complicity. Nancy, his wife, sometimes played the role of caretaker. Other times, she watched in silence while her husband raped Jaycee. Jaycee was just 11 years old. No chains, but nowhere to run. Jaycee wasn't chained up, but she was a prisoner all the same. Her identity faded. She stopped speaking her name. Her days blurred into one another. Garrido used psychological control, fear, confusion, and manipulation to keep her docile. She wasn't allowed to go to school. She wasn't allowed to ask questions. She wasn't allowed to remember who she was. At 14, Jaycee gave birth to her first daughter alone in a dirty tent with no help, no medicine, and no support. Garrido whispered that this was her new family. 3 years later, she gave birth again, 2 daughters, raised behind tarps and fences, never knowing sunlight, never meeting another child, never stepping into the real world. Jaycee taught them to read, to draw, to dream, because dreams were all she had left. Police missed her again and again. Shockingly, police visited Garrido's home multiple times over the years for unrelated issues, but no one ever looked in the backyard. Neighbors described the couple as weird or eccentric, but no one imagined the horror hiding just steps away. No one asked why they had tarps covering the entire yard. No one noticed a young woman or children behind the fence. 18 years passed like that. Quiet, hidden, forgotten. Closing thoughts. When evil lives next door, Jaycee Dugard wasn't dragged into a cave or a faraway jungle. She was living in a tarp-covered prison in a normal neighborhood while the world passed her by. The scariest thing about this story isn't just what happened to her, it's how close she always was. We think monsters live in the dark, but sometimes they live right next door with a picket fence and a friendly wave. Part 2. The twisted mind of a captor. If you think child abductors are sloppy criminals, impulsive, reckless, easy to catch, think again. Philip Garrido wasn't just a predator. He was a master manipulator, a delusional self-proclaimed prophet, and a deeply disturbed man who managed to keep a victim hidden in his own backyard for 18 years without raising suspicion. A repeat offender with his system, Philip Garrido wasn't new to crime. In 1976, he was arrested for kidnapping and raping a woman. He used drugs, locked her in a storage unit, and assaulted her repeatedly. He was sentenced to 50 years, but served just 11. In 1988, he was granted parole under psychiatric supervision, a dangerous man released. That's when he began preparing for the perfect abduction. A delusional chosen one after prison, Garrido spiraled deeper into psychosis. He began claiming he was chosen by God to spread divine messages through music. He built a tiny studio in his home, where he recorded rambling tracks about heaven, spiritual rebirth, and redemption. He truly believed he had a holy power to read minds and save the world. Experts would later suggest he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, combined with antisocial personality disorder, but no one intervened. And in his freedom, Garrido created a twisted religious cult consisting only of himself, his wife Nancy, and Jaycee Nancy, victim or willing accomplice. Nancy Garrido remains one of the most puzzling figures in this case. Some argue she was manipulated, brainwashed, emotionally dependent on her husband. But facts remain. She helped kidnap Jaycee, dragged her into the car, fed her every day, and watched everything without saying a word. At times, Nancy even expressed jealousy, angry that her husband gave Jaycee too much attention. Yet she said nothing, did nothing. Year after year, was she controlled, or did she choose complicity? Psychological prison, the weapon of choice. Unlike other abusers, Garrido didn't rely on physical force or constant violence. He used something far more insidious: emotional captivity. Jaycee was completely isolated. No books, no people, no calendar, no clock. When she disobeyed, he didn't yell. He wept. Guilt tripped her, said she was hurting his soul. He created a bizarre system of warped rewards and punishments. If obedient, she got bread or a few minutes outside. If disruptive, she'd be ignored for days. Slowly, Jaycee stopped resisting. In fact, she began feeling responsible for Garrido's emotions. This is classic Stockholm Syndrome, when captives identify with their captors as a survival strategy. A universe of delusion behind the fantasy. Over 18 years, Garrido constructed an entire alternate reality in his backyard. He taught Jaycee's children bizarre religious doctrines, told them he was a chosen prophet, that their births were miracles from God. He believed their existence proved his divine purpose. By 2006, he even launched a website called Voices Revealed, where he posted audio sermons and ramblings about light-driven music. No one suspected that the webmaster was hiding a woman and 2 children behind a tarp fence. Part to conclusion: when evil wears the mask of faith, Philip Garrido didn't scream or act violently in public. He attended church. He smiled at police. He spoke kindly to neighbors. He gave speeches at schools about helping young people. And that layer of reformed believer, the facade of a holy man, was exactly what let him hide for so long. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it quotes scripture. Sometimes it talks about love. Sometimes it offers you tea while hell burns quietly behind the house. Part 3. The system that looked away. Would like to think the justice system is built to protect us. That when someone dangerous is released back into society, someone is watching. That warning signs will be recognized, that someone will act. But what happens when no one does? Jaycee Dugard didn't spend 18 years in the wilderness. She wasn't hidden in some underground bunker. She was in a regular backyard in a residential neighborhood in plain sight, and the system, designed to find her, walked right past her. Dozens of times. This is the story of how the authorities failed not once, but repeatedly, and allowed a child to grow up in captivity, while the world believed she was gone forever. A known predator with a known address. Philip Garrido wasn't a mystery. He wasn't off the grid or using a fake identity. He was a registered sex offender with a violent criminal history. A man who had previously kidnapped and raped a woman at knife point, held her hostage in a storage unit, and was sentenced to 50 years in federal prison. He served only 11. When released in 1988, Garrido was placed under strict federal parole supervision. That meant regular check-ins, mandatory psychiatric evaluations, unannounced home visits, and monitoring by both federal and state agencies. He was supposed to be among the most closely watched individuals in California, but by 1991, just 3 years after his release, he kidnapped 11-year-old Jaycee Dugard, and no one noticed. Missed clues, ignored warnings from 1991 to 2009. 18 years. Law enforcement and parole officers had more than 60 opportunities to uncover the truth. Neighbors complained, tips were made. Garrido himself had contact with multiple agencies. Still, the system failed. In 1992, a parole officer noted that Garrido had built unusual structures in his backyard, but never investigated further. In 1997, another officer visited the home and claimed everything was in compliance. No one walked behind the house. In 2000, a neighbor filed a formal complaint. They'd heard children's voices coming from the yard, but didn't know Garrido had any children. The police visited, but again, never checked the backyard compound. In 2006, a federal agent made a brief home visit, noticed tarps and tents, and noted that Garrido seemed off. No follow-up. And in 2008, a fire inspector contacted police. about suspicious activity on the property. Nothing was done. The warning signs weren't subtle, but they were consistently dismissed. The backyard no one entered behind Garrido's modest home in Antioch was a maze of makeshift structures, tents, sheds, tarps, fences. It looked chaotic, paranoia mixed with DIY madness. But it was more than that. It was a fortress. Jaycee lived there, hidden just yards away from law enforcement officers who came to the front door, but never stepped around the back. One officer later admitted, "I didn't even know the backyard existed." How could that happen? Because Garrido was polite. He was articulate. He played Christian music in the background. He called everyone sir. He spoke passionately about his rehabilitation, and that was enough. No one pressed further. No one got a warrant. No one looked into the shed. The myth of the reformed offender parole officers are trained to look for red flags. Garrido displayed plenty. He had built a strange recording studio in the backyard. He was unemployed, yet always home. His wife avoided contact. The home appeared cluttered, chaotic, unstable. He claimed to be working on a religious mission, spreading music to heal souls. He gave officers pamphlets about his spiritual beliefs. He claimed God had cured his urges, and somehow people believed him. This is what happens when bureaucracy trumps instinct. When a clean checklist replaces genuine investigation. When a predator plays the role of a penitent hand, the system buys it. The girls no one questioned Abby the early 2000s. Garrido wasn't just hiding Jaycee, he was raising her children. 2 daughters, born in captivity, lived in that backyard. They never went to school, never saw a doctor, never spoke to anyone outside their confined world. Neighbors caught glimpses. They called them ghost children, pale, shy, silent. But no one knew their names. No one asked questions, and when officers came by, Garrido told them they were his brother's kids, that the family was going through something private, that they were homeschooled for religious reasons. Again, no one verified. No one asked to see paperwork. No one called Child Protective Services. Years passed. The psychology of silence. How could Jaycee remain silent for so long? How could she not scream, not run, not fight back? The answer lies in something far more powerful than physical chains: psychological captivity. From age 11, Jaycee was told her mother had abandoned her. She was told that the police would hurt her, that the world had moved on, that Garrido was her only protector. She was never called by her real name. She was never allowed to read a newspaper, watch the news, or speak to another adult. She didn't know what year it was, didn't know how to use a phone, didn't even know how to ask for help. By the time she was 20, her identity as Jaycee was buried under layers of trauma, confusion, and false guilt. She existed, but only as Alyssa, Garrido's daughter, then partner, then mother to his children. The breaking point. UC Berkeley, August 2009. The fall came not through years of investigation, but through a single moment of doubt. On August 24, 2009, Garrido showed up at the UC Berkeley campus. He brought along his 2 daughters, Jaycee's children. He was trying to book a venue for his bizarre religious group. Campus security officers were immediately suspicious. The girls were unusually quiet. They spoke in rehearsed tones. They called Garrido Dad, but something felt off. The officers ran his name through the system. It came back: registered sex offender, prior conviction for kidnapping and rape. They alerted his parole officer. The next day, Garrido was called in for questioning. He arrived with Jaycee, now in her late 20s, who introduced herself as Alyssa. After hours of pressure, she finally broke. "I'm Jaycee," she whispered. Just like that, the secret was over. A national shame when news broke that Jaycee had been found. The nation was shocked, elated, yes, but also furious. How could this happen? Investigations were launched. Federal agencies scrambled to explain how a supervised sex offender managed to hide a young girl and raise 2 children under their watch for nearly 2 decades. The truth: the system was never designed for persistence. It was built for checklists, for paper trails, for shallow inspections. It assumed reformation when it should have demanded proof. It accepted politeness as compliance. In 2011, California paid Jaycee $20 million in compensation, not just for the kidnapping, but for years of official negligence. But no amount of money can erase the time lost. Jaycee's own words in her memoir, Stolen Life. Jaycee wrote, "I survived because I had to, but I shouldn't have had to." She wasn't rescued. She freed herself because finally, someone looked a little closer. Closing thoughts. The price of inaction. Jaycee Dugard's story is one of survival, but also one of systemic failure. She was not just a victim of Garrido. She was a victim of every officer who didn't look past the living room, every official who didn't ask a second question, every neighbor who hesitated to speak up. She lived behind a fence, but the real prison was built by apathy. Part 4. A voice reclaimed. Jaycee's road to healing. 18 years in captivity, 18 years of silence, of fear, of forgetting who you are When Jaycee Dugard finally whispered her name to police in 2009, the world rejoiced. A missing child had been found. But what came next was not the ending, only the beginning of a long, uncertain journey. This is the story of what happens after survival, the story of rebuilding, of rediscovery, and of a woman who turned pain into power and horror into hope. The first hours of freedom. What happens now? August 26, 2009. After identifying herself as Jaycee, she was taken to an undisclosed location under heavy security. The media exploded. Helicopters hovered. Reporters camped outside police stations and hospitals. But Jaycee wasn't ready to be a headline. She hadn't spoken to another adult in nearly 2 decades other than her captors. She hadn't seen her mother since she was 11. She hadn't driven a car, used a computer, owned a phone, or walked freely down a street. She asked officers simple questions. Is my mom still alive? Will I be allowed to keep my animals? Do I have to testify? Freedom, at first, felt like another world. The reunion, a hug 18 years in the making when Jaycee finally reunited with her mother Terry. No words were needed. They simply held each other and cried. 18 years stolen, but not destroyed. Terry had never stopped searching, never stopped believing. She had kept Jaycee's room the same, kept her photos on the walls, kept the same phone number just in case. Jaycee's daughters, aged 11 and 15 at the time, had never met their grandmother. They had been raised in isolation, told the outside world was evil. But now, for the first time, they met family, real family. It was overwhelming, but it was real. Learning the world again, Jaycee had to relearn everything. How to go shopping, how to use a debit card, how to walk into a restaurant, how to make choices. In captivity, her life was ruled by someone else. Every decision, when to eat, when to sleep, what to say, had been controlled. Now, even small things felt foreign. I didn't know how to order from a menu, she later wrote. I didn't know how to trust that no one was watching me all the time. She worked with trauma specialists, therapists, and doctors. But healing wasn't linear. There were panic attacks, flashbacks, moments where fear gripped her without warning. Still, she refused to be broken, protecting her daughters more than anything. Jaycee wanted to protect her daughters. They were born in darkness, but she was determined they would not live in it. She shielded them from the media, gave them space to adjust, and insisted they receive education, therapy, and normalcy. She let them choose their own names, let them pick their favorite foods, let them be loud, be messy, be kids. The world was a storm, but inside their new home, she built peace. My girls are my world, she said. Everything I do for them to be free. Writing her story, A Stolen Life, in 2011, Jaycee released her memoir, A Stolen Life. It wasn't written by a ghostwriter. It wasn't polished for drama. It was raw, honest, and deeply personal. She included journal entries, letters, and even drawings from her years in captivity. It was her way of taking control of the narrative. They took my voice for 18 years, she said. I'm taking it back. The book became a bestseller, but more importantly, it resonated with thousands of survivors, many of whom had never spoken about their own pain. Until reading her words, Jaycee proved that you could speak the unspeakable and still be whole. The Jaycee Foundation, helping others reconnect. Jaycee could have disappeared into privacy. No one would have blamed her. Instead, she founded the Jaycee Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping families heal after trauma, especially those torn apart by abduction, abuse, or long-term separation. The foundation provides therapy, equine-assisted healing using horses, and crisis response teams. It doesn't just offer services, it offers understanding. Jaycee believes in the power of reconnection between survivors and families, between pain and peace. Trauma isolates, she said. Healing reconnects. Facing her captors in court and choosing not to speak in 2011. Philip and Nancy Garrido pleaded guilty. Jaycee didn't testify, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't want to give them more of her life. Garrido was sentenced to 431 years to life. Nancy received 36 years to life. Jaycee said it best. I've already spent enough of my life thinking about them. I'm done. She didn't watch the sentencing. She didn't want revenge. She wanted peace. The power of naming on of the most powerful things Jaycee ever did was reclaim her name. In captivity, she was Alyssa. She was never allowed to say or hear Jaycee. Over time, she forgot what it felt like to be herself, but now she says it proudly. She signs her books. She speaks at events. She tells her daughters who she was, who she is, and who she's becoming. Jaycee Dugard, not a victim, not just a survivor, a person, a mother, a warrior, a message to the world. Jaycee never sugarcoats her pain. She talks about it. She writes about it, but she refuses to be defined by it. She speaks to law enforcement, agencies, social workers, and trauma teams. She trains them to look deeper, listen harder, act sooner. She speaks to survivors, Not with platitudes, but with presence, with truth. You are not broken, she tells them. You are more than what was done to you. Her story is not just about rescue, it's about rebuilding. It's about reclaiming a stolen life piece by piece, day by day. Closing thoughts. What Jaycee teaches you, Jaycee Dugard's story didn't end with freedom. It began there. It's not just a crime story. It's not just a survival tale. It's a blueprint for how we rebuild after being shattered. She teaches us that silence can be broken, that trauma doesn't have to define you, that healing is messy but possible, that even in the darkest place, the light never really leaves you. Part 5. Legacy and Lessons. How one survivor changed the system. 18 years of captivity. A rescue that shook the world. A survivor who rose from silence to become a voice for millions. But what happens after the headlines fade, when the news vans pull away, and the applause quiets down? Jaycee Dugard didn't stop. She didn't just survive, she changed the world around her. In this final chapter, we explore the impact of her story, how it transformed public awareness, reshaped laws, exposed systemic failures, and sparked a larger movement toward trauma-informed care and prevention. A case that forced the nation to look closer. When Jaycee was found in 2009, the country didn't just react with shock, it reacted with guilt. How could this happen under federal supervision? How did parole officers miss what was right behind the fence? How could someone hide a family in a backyard in modern America? Jaycee's case became a symbol of everything that could go wrong in a system designed to protect. Public trust in parole supervision dropped. State and federal agencies were flooded with questions, audits, and demands for change. It was no longer just about Jaycee. It was about the countless others the system might be failing right now. Policy changes sparked by her story. Following her rescue, the state of California launched a series of investigations and reforms. California Inspector General report. This report outlined a staggering number of oversights. Garrido was visited dozens of times without thorough inspections. Parole officers ignored suspicious signs, including the presence of children he wasn't supposed to be near. Records were often incomplete or falsified. Communication between agencies was disjointed and incompetent. The result? Jaycee's captivity could have ended years earlier. New guidelines for monitoring sex offenders. California implemented stricter protocols, mandatory backyard and property searches for sex offenders, increased training on identifying non-physical indicators of abuse, a centralized reporting system across agencies reducing miscommunication, psychological evaluations that consider coercive control, not just visible threats. Jaycee's name became part of every case file review, every officer training, not because she asked for it, but because her story revealed a crack too wide to ignore. $20 million in compensation, a message, not a prize. In 2010, the state of California awarded Jaycee and her daughters $20 million. It wasn't a reward, it was an apology. The settlement was a direct acknowledgement that the state had failed in its duty of care, that the supervision in place to protect society had not only failed Jaycee, it had kept her in prison longer. Jaycee used a portion of the settlement to build a quiet life for her family, but much of it went toward launching her nonprofit and expanding services for survivors. She didn't just take the money, she turned it into momentum. The Jaycee Foundation, Healing Beyond Headliness. Jaycee Foundation stands for Just Ask Yourself to Care. This isn't just a slogan, it's a challenge to law enforcement, to social workers, to neighbors, to all of us. Jaycee's foundation trains professionals in trauma-informed practices. It connects survivors with equine therapy, family counseling, and long-term support networks. But most importantly, it brings families back together after unimaginable breaks. Whether through abduction, foster separation, or incarceration, the foundation believes that reconnection is not only possible, it's essential to healing. Jaycee often says, you can't fix everything, but you can be someone's first step. Changing the narrative of survivorship. Jaycee's voice reshaped how we talk about trauma. Before, survivors were often portrayed as fragile, broken, or damaged. Media narratives focus on what was done to them, not what they became after. Jaycee challenged that. She redefined the word survivor. She showed that you can write your own story. That speaking out doesn't make you weak, it makes you unstoppable. She doesn't hide her pain. She doesn't glorify it either. She shares it, unfiltered, human, real, because her story isn't just hers. It's every survivor's story told through a voice that was once silenced and now refuses to be quiet. Global influence, shaping law enforcement around the world. Jaycee's impact didn't stop at the California state line. Her story became a case study in global policing. Conferences, departments across Europe, Asia, and Latin America began studying long-term abduction patterns, coercive control dynamics, and psychological manipulation tactics. More importantly, Jaycee's case highlighted a universal truth. Abuse doesn't always look violent. Captivity doesn't always involve chains. Survivors don't always ask for help because they're not always allowed to know they need it. These realizations are now standard in child protection training programs in dozens of countries. Jaycee gave law enforcement a new lens, one that sees the invisible. From isolation to inspiration, public speaking, and advocacy in the years since her rescue, Jaycee has stepped onto stages that once would have terrified her. She's spoken in schools, police academies, medical conferences, even Congress. Her goal: to educate, to warn, but above all to empower. She tells survivors they're not alone. She tells professionals not to rely on paperwork but on instincts. She tells families to never stop searching and to believe in the impossible. She isn't there for pity, she's there to ignite change. Every time I speak, she once said, I feel like I'm taking back another piece of my life. And yet, the system is still not enough for all the progress. Jaycee remains vocal about one painful reality: the system is still not ready. Children are still disappearing. Survivors are still disbelieved. Resources are still underfunded. Trauma is still misunderstood. Often, institutions still focus on visible abuse, bruises, scars, screams. But what about emotional imprisonment? What about subtle coercion? What about families too afraid or too powerless to speak? Jaycee's mission now is clear. Don't stop where her rescue ended. Start where her healing began. A letter to every survivor. If Jaycee could speak to every person still trapped in a room, in a mind, in a memory, this is what she'd say: you are more than what they did to you. You are not ruined. You are not dirty. You are not weak. You are still here. That means something. That means everything. She believes survivors aren't just people who escaped. They're people who rebuild. And every single one has a voice, no matter how long it's been silenced. Final reflections. What Jaycee Dugard left behind. Jaycee's legacy is not a single moment. It's a ripple effect. It lives in the children who were found earlier, in the officers who dig deeper, in the survivors who speak sooner, in the families who get a second chance. She didn't just survive the unimaginable, she turned it into a blueprint for change. And as we close this series, we leave you with this: don't wait for the next Jaycee to remind us to care. Care now, look now, speak now, listen now, because somewhere, someone is waiting to be seen. Thank you for walking this path with Room 57. What we've explored is more than a story, it's a reckoning. A child stolen at 11, a life hidden behind fences, and a spirit that refused to be broken. Jaycee Dugard didn't just survive, she transformed. She turned silence into strength, trauma into testimony, and isolation into impact. Her story reminds us that darkness does exist, but so does the unshakable will to rise above it. Not every survivor is found, not every voice gets heard, but because of Jaycee and because people like you choose to listen, the world becomes just a little more aware, a little more compassionate, and a lot harder to fool. And now, we ask you, if this story moved you, if it made you pause, reflect, or feel something real, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Room 57 for more true stories that deserve to be told. Like this video if Jaycee's courage inspired you. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone together. We don't just watch crime stories, we remember the victims, we honor their voices, and we learn. This is Room 57, where silence ends.